Okay, so taking a look at today, this is going to be, like I said, continuing on the PowerPoint that we've been chipping away at here. This is going to still be PFT 101, Essentials and Fitness Assessments, day 7. And it's going to be PowerPoint 5, slides 7 through 43, right? That's what I said. God dang it, 7. Yeah, 7 through 43. Okay. So we know that we know the fitness assessments, right? Again, if we go back to it, we're going to use a combination of like objective and subjective information, right? We need to be able to, objectively measure someone's functional capacity. Like we love objective. I tend to, rely heavily on objective information, but like we use subjective information as well to kind of figure out like the background behind how somebody's cardio maybe got into dysfunction, or maybe why their heart rate is such a, their resting heart rate is kind of in an elevated state. Your subjective stuff can kind of fill in the gaps and help you understand a little bit about your client's like lifestyle, a little bit about any past injuries they have. It tells you their goals, right? You can't measure somebody's goals, but you can make measurable goals. Looking at an overall fitness assessment, yeah, it's going to consist of subjective and objective information. So again, defining it right, subjective information, the stuff that you cannot measure. We're going to be kind of talking about that here. Subjective information is going to be information about a client's that cannot be measured, right? So it's subjective. It's kind of like it's like opinions, right? You can't measure an opinion. You can measure facts. But the big thing we need to remember is that like this is going to give us information regarding like our client's background, right? Personal history, occupation, lifestyle, medical background, things like that. So it gives the fitness professional feedback regarding client personal history, such as occupation, lifestyle, and medical background. So first part of this, first part and most important part, arguably, is going to be your PAR-Q, right? Your physical activity readiness questionnaire, right? Again, that's the PAR-Q, which we spent plenty of time talking about in the last class, but we do got to kind of re-go over it here. So your PAR-Q are questions directly directed towards any cardiorespiratory dysfunction. Their job is to detect cardiorespiratory dysfunction, right? So it is questions directed toward detecting any possible cardiorespiratory dysfunction. So if your client answers, is this actually going to be on the next slide? No, it's not. So if your client answers yes to any of the questions on the PAR-Q, you want to make sure that you get doctor's clearance. You want to get medical clearance before you start training them. Okay, that's a really big important thing to remember. If answers to any of the questions on the PAR-Q, make sure you get medical clearance Okay, so that's the big thing we need to remember about the PAR-Q. You want to always, always, always get information or get permission from the doctor if they answer yes to anything. Because if that person has a heart attack during their, fitness session with you, even if it's during like your first time assessment, technically you are going to be held liable and responsible for that person because you didn't check to see if they were capable of getting through that session. So that is kind of a big thing. That's a big part of like keeping yourself safe, right? That's really what we're looking for here. Now your general and medical history questionnaire is going to be broken up into a couple different pieces. But the general and medical history questionnaire are going to be questions directed, or let's see here, basic questions regarding a client's history and personal background. So things like their occupation, right? There's really big, there's a reason we're actually going to ask, does your occupation require extended periods of sitting, right? Why do you think that would be so important? What do you guys think?
For postural distortion.
Yeah, right?
Postural distortion.
Absolutely.
Tight IT bands.
Yeah, tight IT band is definitely a big one. Yeah, that entire hip flexor complex, right? They are sitting in a hip flex position. Also, we know like if they are struggling with their weight, they likely have low energy expenditure, right? So that's good. So we're going to ask questions like that because we know that like extended periods of sitting can lead to overactive or shortened hip flexors. We know that extended periods of sitting lead to low energy expenditure, right? So we start to like kind of, we start to kind of get a little bit of a background about our clients. We're starting to figure out like how they got to where they are. Again, like, I always talk about like, it's my favorite phrase, like function follows form, but like, sometimes it takes a little while for you to figure out how that function got created, you need to be able to like analyze the form. And that's really why we're asking these questions here. Does your occupation require extended periods of repetitive movement, right? That can also lead to shortened muscles, right? Require extended, I can't type. Right, so if we ask questions like that, we might find that repetitive movements, oh my God. Repetitive movements lead to overactive or shortened muscles, right? So for instance, like if somebody's doing like overhead motions all day, maybe they're like a construction worker or, some type of contractor, painter, something like that, those repetitive movements can lead to like weakness in those muscles, right? The muscle becomes overactive, therefore it becomes tight, therefore it has an altered length tension relationship, therefore it is weaker than it's supposed to be. Therefore. So like that's definitely something we want to screen for, right? We want to ask questions related to that to see if maybe we can figure out like what that is. Then we can give our client like advice on how to fix that. It's like, okay, well, every hour or so, like while you're at work, I want to take you just a few minutes to go do these stretches. That's going to make you feel a lot more comfortable. Then you can get back to work, Does your occupation require you to wear a shoe with an elevated heel? Wait, to wear shoes with an elevated heel. Right, and this is a lot of times like when we think of like high heels, we're thinking of like nice, going out shoes for our female clients. This is Oh, come on, internet, don't you dare, not today. But this can be any of our clients, right? We know that like, you know, like male dress shoes puts you into an like plantar flex position, so that leads to tightness as well. So don't make assumptions on that and skip this question just because it's, you know, a male client. A lot of times actually your male clients are gonna be the ones with the tight calves. So elevated heels put the ankle into plantar flexion, which reduces ankle dorsiflexion strength, right? So by being in that overflexed position, right, by being in that like plantar flexed position and walking around like this all day, they're gonna have really tight calves. That means that when they start like squatting, they're probably going to have trouble with dorsiflexion, probably going to have trouble pulling their toes back towards them. And we know that's part of squatting, right? When you descend into a squat, your tibia travels forward. And so like if that tibia is not able to travel forward because you aren't able to do dorsiflexion, that person instead is going to maybe lean forward rather than like continuing to bend their ankle. And then that'll allow them to like kind of simulate getting lower, right? It'll have them be able to squat a little bit lower while keeping their balance, but they're not squatting how we're designed to move, right? And so that's putting undue stress on specific, you know, shortened and lengthened muscles. And lastly, does your occupation cause a lot of mental stress or anxiety, right? So this one, we know that like, you know, actually, let's see, how well do you guys remember? Why do we ask about stress? What happens with stress in particular?
It elevates. Oh, I'm sorry. it elevates the shoulders. Elevates the. It puts the body, the upper body, in that compromised position.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it.
Sorry.
I like how you were pantomiming. You were just like doing this. Heads, shoulders, knees, and toes. Yeah, it tightens up your. So in particular, right? It does tighten up your muscles, but in particular, and this is how you can explain this to your clients. Like mental stress and anxiety leads to shallow breathing patterns. So when you breathe like with shallow breathing patterns, we kind of have this tendency to breathe like this, like, see how like much motion my upper body is making? All I'm doing right now is breathing into my chest, which is likely, you know, if I keep doing this, eventually I'm going to hyperventilate. I'm actually going to like be getting rid of too much CO2 and not bringing enough, leaving in enough oxygen. And so what ends up happening is my CO2 levels are actually going to drop. And then my body is going to like go into a panic attack. It's going to try to make me breathe even more to get, you know, more oxygen in and like not get rid of as much CO2. But what's weird is like it totally does get rid of more CO2 and eventually that kind of leads to an imbalance, and then I experience like a panic attack. So, you know, little shallow breathing patterns, very, very bad for that reason. But what ends up happening is like when you're doing your shallow breathing patterns, your secondary respiratory muscles are doing all of the work, right? So like your upper trapezius muscles, levator scapula, even all that stuff that's maybe opening, like pulling your scapula away to let you take a quick, short, little tiny breath in. You know, your pectoral muscles, like those are all doing a lot of work here when they really shouldn't be, right? Like ideally, we should be breathing into our stomach, right? Should be breathing into our diaphragm. That's your primary respiratory muscle. But when you start using that secondary stuff, that leads to tightness. That tightness alters your posture and can lead to that forward head posture, that rounded shoulder posture, all that bad stuff, right? Stress leads to shallow breathing patterns, which lead to overactivity in secondary respiratory muscles, such as the upper trapezius and pectoral muscles. Yeah, good Lord. That is very, 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 very common. Yeah, a lot of people don't want to breathe into their stomach because it causes that kind of pooching sensation. So a lot of people kind of avoid that and they try to like tighten down their core so they look, slim. But that's not really, oh, come on. That's not really what we're going for. Why is my internet being a piece of crap today? And why am I getting phone calls? Hold on one second. All right. All of those questions are really important because they give us an idea of like what we might start to look for later when we get to our posture, right? Like if I know somebody's got an elevated heel, I'm going to pay extra special attention to their ankle complex when they're doing an overhead squat. If they have extended periods of sitting, I'm going to pay extra special attention to their lumbopelvic hip complex. If they have a lot of stress, I'm definitely going to do an upper body pushing and pulling assessment, right? That's going to give me, an idea of where to start looking for dysfunction. The next part that we are also going to ask are questions about like our lifestyle and hobbies, right? So we'll put that up here as well. Oh gosh. Okay. No problem, Suzanne. We'll see you hopefully tomorrow. Let me know if you get that email. Let me know if that's everything you need, by the way. If you need anything else, shoot me a text in case I don't email you back right away, because obviously that happened last time. All right. Good luck. Don't break any legs. All right.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No problem. So our lifestyle and hobbies questionnaire, right? Ooh, hold on, come on now. These are gonna be questions related to like your client's recreation or their hobbies, right? So questions related to recreational activities or hobbies, right? So, this can provide information on a client's general interests, which will make for fun or interactive program design, right? So like when you ask your client about like their likes, their dislikes, their hobbies and stuff, that may not seem like all that important to a personal trainer, but it's actually super crucial because it tells you, you got to remember that like training sessions are like an hour of, social interaction, right? Not only is this person like showing up to work out, like they also have to like, there has to be a pretty good like back and forth in terms of like how you're talking to your client. If they are, if they find that the session is, you're not explaining things the way they wanted them explained, or that you're not putting emphasis on the things that are important to them or that they're interested in, they're going to lose interest, and that's going to lead to your client showing up 5 minutes late, and then they show up 10 minutes late, and then, they aren't really doing their homework because they don't really enjoy it. You got to make sure that you are putting emphasis on designing a program that is effective for the person that you are training, like, when I used to do boot camps, one of the things that I used to do that was like really fun is I would just rename my exercises. And I would just, it wasn't like it was anything special. Like I would write a boot camp totally normally. I would use all the normal exercise names that I would normally write. But then I always use like little whiteboards around like my field that would show people like, it'd tell people like what to do. And so like if somebody was like halfway through like a circuit and they would forget, they'd look at the whiteboard and be like, oh, that's right, push-ups are next. And so like, I just went by and like, the Hunger Games was like coming out like right at the time when my boot camp was like peaking and stuff. And so like the Hunger Games were super, super popular as a movie. And so like I just relabeled all the exercise names to be like Hunger Game names, and like all my nerdy, 25-year-old like boot camp attendees were like, this is hilarious, this is great, we love it. It was just something like kind of engaging and kind of entertaining. I didn't do anything different. It was totally the same like exercises, but I just found a way to make it slightly more interesting. If you know what your client's like interests are, you can target those interests, right? If your client likes soccer, you can focus on doing things for like lower body, agility and drills and things like that. So, again, it may not necessarily seem like the most important information in the world, but finding out about somebody's hobbies is a great way for you to know what to design when you get to, writing your program. Remember, step one is identifying any issues. Step two is solving those issues. If your issue is that your client hates to work out, and by the way, you are going to get people who will tell you that. Like before you start working with them, they're like, all right, I'm going to sign up for a 6-session package. Oh, by the way, I hate working out. Like that sounds like, oh, that's going to be something that happens rarely. No, it's going to happen a lot. It's going to not be rare at all. I had a guy, I used to train him and his wife. And he was like a very supportive husband who very much cared about his wife, absolutely despised exercise. Like I would constantly check in with him. I did everything I could to make sure that like our sessions were like engaging and somewhat fun. And I think he knew that I was putting a lot of emphasis on this because like on purpose, he started like saying how terrible it was. Like it was very cheeky, like he was doing it on purpose, but I'd be like, how was today's session? Kind of engaging, right? It was a little more fun than normal. And he was like, eh. And I'd be like, you're the worst. And like, we had a good relationship. He had never showed up late for his sessions because like he was always committed to like taking care of his health. He's like, I'm here because I need to be around to continue loving my wife for another 30 years. And I was like, that's great, Jerry. Like, let's keep working together then. Let's keep you upright, And so, we would use that as like a motivational tool, he is definitely, I really remember training him very fondly. He was one of like not one of the first clients I ever had, but like definitely one of my first like private clients. And I trained him for like a really, really long time. He hated training so much that he decided to move privately, and then I would come to his house. So that's, how much he actually hated training. Next one you got to figure out is your medical history. Medical history questionnaire. This is going to be obviously very important. So medical history questionnaire. These are going to this is going to be used to find out a client's medical history by obtaining information about life-threatening chronic illnesses, as well as structural and functional health, right? So it's going to be questions about past surgeries. Why are past surgeries so important? Well, I think that's kind of a twofold answer actually, right? Past surgeries are going to be important because not only is that going to tell you, what might be, like when you have surgery, you often have like scar tissue left over afterwards. And so that leads to decreased mobility, right? Like if somebody was skiing and they fell or something and tore a bunch of ligaments in their knee, and they had to have like, knee surgery to reattach some of those ligaments. That there's going to be some weakness and stability issues in the knee complex, right? So that's great for you to like be able to know. But I think surgeries also kind of give us a background on like maybe what might have led to our client getting the way they got, right? Like again, nothing gets the way it is unless it was designed to get that way, right? Like if we go back to function following form, like, your life is designed to give you the results you are receiving, right? So if we look at like somebody who tore their ACL and had to have surgery on their ACL, we need to like look at that and be like, okay, we know knee stability is going to be an issue because of like that tear. But we also need to look at it from the standpoint of like, they probably tore their ACL because they had knee instability, right? The knee instability led to the torn ACL, right? So that's definitely something we can kind of focus on, right? Past surgeries can provide guidance towards, you know, what exercises to focus on in terms of mobility and stabilization, right? Past injuries, right? Same concept. I'm actually going to put injuries and surgeries together. Past injuries or surgeries. Chronic health conditions, that's obviously going to be huge. The chronic health conditions can give us guidance towards like, you know, what we know that like we can have a really positive effect on things like osteoporosis by lifting at a high intensity. We know that we can exacerbate the problems related to arthritis if we do a super high number of repetitions and way too much time under tension. So, you know, this is going to give us an idea of like what exercises to do and what exercises to avoid. So chronic health conditions can provide guidance towards what exercises might improve chronic conditions and what exercises are contraindicated, right? Or what should be avoided. And then lastly, medications, right? Medications can have specific physiologic effects that we want to be aware of during a session. So my favorite example of like talking about like medications, for instance, is always talking about like heart medication. You know, if you are on like a beta blocker, which could lower your heart rate, and you've got a client who has like a de-elevated heart rate, you get them on the treadmill and you're measuring their heart rate and you calculated out their heart rate zones prior, and you're like, man, you're doing really great today. Let's make this even harder. Boop, 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 boop. Meanwhile, they're over there like, and it's like, it says right here on your watch, you're doing fine, you know, like maybe not the best choice in the world. So it's something to definitely be aware of. All of a sudden your client goes shooting off the back end. Not something we want to have happen. So we want to be aware of our medications. Any questions on subjective information? Questions, comments, concerns on that?
No, that was good.
All right. So yeah, I know that's like very familiar. It's like, all right, dude, we've talked about subjective information at the top of every one of our last 3 courses. Yeah, that'll be pretty much the last time it shows up until we get to the sports class. Sports class, we'll jump right into like objective stuff because we look at sports performance testing. So, you know, we're getting a lot of the assessment stuff out today. Well, over this course, and we get a little bit more in the program design class. All right, but we always talk about information frequently because like information and program design are so interweaved. All right, let's look at the objective stuff, right? Let's look at the measurable stuff. This is what we're going to spend really the rest of the course talking about, right? There's so much more objective information out there. So objective information by definition information that can be measured, right? Typically number based. So what's really cool about like objective information is you can use it to compare, and you can compare it against past assessments, right? Like if your client loses a couple inches, that's a really cool motivation tool. It's like, hey, you lost 3 inches on your waist over the last few weeks. that's pretty freaking good, you know? Hey, you lost a quarter inch on your arms, you know, like all those little tiny like measurements are really helpful. Or your body fat percentage has decreased by 2%. You know, those changes, comparing yourself over time, are really, really cool because it gives your client like feedback on whether or not the program is working and if we need to make adjustments, right? So we can compare those numbers in order to determine the effectiveness of our training. So the first bit of objective information we are going to look at are your physiologic assessments here, right? So physiologic assessments. For the record, these categories are not super important, by the way. Like they're not going to, like I'm gonna label these in specific categories just because that helps give me like a guidance for your notes. And I think you should do that as well. However, don't like, I know sometimes people put a lot of stress on being like, oh, is that considered a physiologic assessment or is that considered a cardio assessment? Don't worry about stuff like that. Like they're not gonna ask you questions as like, you know, is the YMCA 3-minute step test considered blank type of assessment? They don't do that. They would say, is it considered objective or subjective information? You might get something like that, but definitely like these categories are not a test subject. However, I'm going to put them in categories just to kind of keep our notes clear. And you'll see like NASM, like if you go into our other classes, you'll even notice sometimes they'll move an assessment from one category to another. Because again, they're just doing it for labeling purposes as well. So physiologic assessments, our best examples of this are going to be things like your heart rate and blood pressure. There's a couple different heart rates out there, right? So we'll look at just kind of basic, just gathering heart rate first, right? So heart rate, right? The number of times the heart beats in 60 seconds, okay? Your heart rate's always going to be referring to a 60-second rate. We don't really do any assessments where we're referring to the heart rate at any other like length of time. However, you don't have to measure it for a full 60 seconds. You can measure it for 10 seconds and multiply by 6, 15 seconds multiplied by 4. There's a million different ways you can do it. But generally, when we talk about heart rate, we are only ever referring to the number of beats in a full minute's time. So generally, NASM is going to recommend, obviously you guys know this, but generally NASM is going to recommend using the radial pulse in order to gather somebody's heart rate, right? Typically, we want to measure the heart rate by taking a client's radial pulse, right? With 2 fingers in line with the thumb and index finger just above the wrist on the left arm. Okay, so when you're getting somebody's pulse, I mean, you can do it on the right. It's not like you don't have a, you know, it's not like you don't have an artery there as well. But generally, want to go on the side that's like closer to the heart. So lightly press 2 fingers along the arm, in line with and just above the thumb. Once that pulse is identified, count it for 60 seconds, okay? So once the pulse is identified, count the number of beats in 60 seconds. So when it comes to gathering your resting heart rate, I really like doing a full 60 seconds. There's a couple of reasons I really like doing the full 60-second version because number one, it ensures accuracy. You know, if you do 6 seconds and multiply by 10, if you missed a half a beat in the beginning and you miss a half a beat at the end, you know, that makes like a full beat's difference, which is going to lower their heart rate by, you know, by 10. So you might think that their heart rate's 130 when it's actually 140, you know? So I'm not, I like the 6-second method. If my client is like working really hard in a session and I'm like, hey, I want to gather your heart rate real quick to make sure you're not working too hard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, get back to work, you know? Like if I want to like get their heart rate and get them right back onto movement, the 6-second method is great. But if your client is like at rest and, you know, they're going to stay at rest because maybe you've just done your fitness assessment, it's a great time for you to just be like, go ahead and stay seated. I'm just going to go ahead and grab your pulse real quick. Now, when that happens too, like, you know, you got to remember the thing about fitness assessments. You're usually doing this like your first session with somebody. So they just met you, you are a stranger, and you're like, hey, I'm going to put my hands on you and take your pulse. You know, like that can sometimes lead to a little bit of anxiety or anxiousness. So like, that's another reason why I like the 60-second method, because like, you know, maybe their heart rate spikes for just a few seconds and then it starts to slowly calm down again as they're like, okay, this weirdo is not that weird, hopefully, right? And so like you can take it for a full 60. So I like it because it ensures accuracy. Also, it might lower even, you know, it might actually drop even lower than it does in the first few seconds. And that's really what we're trying to get here. We want to get like their low heart rate, you know? This is why this is the first assessment that you're going to do after you're done with the questionnaires. So as soon as you're done with like the general medical history questionnaire, as soon as you're done with the Part Q, you're going to move straight into the heart rate, or the resting heart rate, because they're already in a seated position. They're already somewhat resting. Now, a true resting heart rate really shouldn't be taken like in the middle of a gym environment, like after your client walked to their car, drove to the gym, and then walked to the gym and, you know, moved around. That's not really how you want to get somebody's resting heart rate. Their resting heart rate should be taken like when they are at rest. Ideally, if you can get your client to actually get their resting heart rate before swinging their legs over and hitting the floor in the morning, that would be the best time to get their resting heart rate. Like they've just been asleep and they haven't necessarily gotten upright just yet. That's the perfect time to get a really, really accurate resting heart rate. But good luck convincing somebody to remember to do that. If you can actually get someone to remember to get their resting heart rate before they get out of bed, kudos to you. You're a better instructor than I am. Usually the case, what'll happen is be like, did you get your resting heart rate? Oh, I forgot. Did you get your resting heart rate? Oh, I forgot. And then like 10 years go by. That's your radial pulse. Here's your carotid, by the way. We do actually, we mention it here. It's in your textbook, but how you get your carotid pulse, again, lightly place 2 fingers just along the side of your larynx, right? And you're gonna feel like that pulsing sensation. Once it's identified, again, you're gonna see here, they're gonna say, do it for 30 seconds and multiply by 2. That's a fine method. You could do it for a full 60 seconds. You could do it for 10 seconds and multiply by 6, 6 seconds by 10, 15 seconds by 4. You can do a bunch of weird things, you know? But you're gonna record that average over the course of 3 days. So that's sort of what we're looking at when we look at like gathering your resting heart rate. Typically when you use a radial pulse, that's over 60 seconds. Average resting heart rate. That's gonna be about 70 beats per minute for most males and about 75 beats per minute for most women, right? So most females. 70 to 80 is the average. You guys are aware of that. We just had that on our homework yesterday, or test yesterday. But in general, like, you know, a good resting heart rate, we're looking for about 70 to 75. Now that may come as a surprise, by the way. I know 70 to 75 might actually seem high to some of the people in this room, considering that most people at Sochi who are training to be trainers are trainers and have worked out pretty regularly. You might find that you're like, whoa, my resting heart rate's like 65. Is that bad? No, it's not bad. Just shows you have like a really strong heart that doesn't have to beat all that often. It's able to send lots of blood with, you know, less number of beats. So next little bit of physiologic stuff. As we look at heart rate, we've also got to talk about target heart rate. So target heart rate is one of the most important, right? So target heart rate. So your target heart rate is going to be a percentage of your max heart rate, right? So target heart rate is a specific percentage of maximal heart rate, right? It is used to determine, or used to guide exercise intensity, right? So if I want you to work really intense, I'm going to have you be at a high percentage of your heart rate max. If I want you to be able to go for a really long time, I'm aiming for low intensity. I'm going to do a relatively low percentage of your heart rate max. So when you look at it, like this is the difference between like a marathon and a sprint, right? Like a sprint is super maximal heart rate over a very short period of time, whereas a marathon is like, you know, a relatively low heart rate over an extremely extended period of time, until you get to the kick, until you get to the very end and your finish line. Then you go as hard as you can. And you break that rule. But you better be sure that you're done. So that's your target heart rate. We love calculating our client's target heart rate because that takes the guesswork out of your cardio. That leads us to having to know our heart rate max formula. We need to know our max heart rate formula. So max heart rate is going to be 220 minus your age equals heart rate max. Okay, so that is our formula for calculating heart rate, max heart rate. It's gonna be 220 minus your age equals heart rate max. And that's the same for everybody. It's always gonna be a flat 220. There's no specialness to that number. For the record, there's actually max heart rate formula. You know what? I'm going to move this back one just so we have a little bit more room. These notes get lengthy. And look at that. Yeah. Okay. Still didn't work. So your max heart rate formula, 220 minus your age equals your heart rate max. Then we've got what's called the regression formula. This is actually a little more commonly used today. Your regression formula just has been shown in like a lot of studies to be a little bit more effective. However, it applies much better to people like athletes rather than just like average folks. So we like this is something you're going to learn in this class that you're probably not going to see very often in your normal tests. But the regression formula is another way to calculate heart rate max. Slightly different here. So it's still going to tell you your heart rate max. It's just using different numbers. So the regression formula is going to be, ooh, that's what I should do. Colon. Is going to be 208 minus 70% of your age. So your age times 0.7 equals heart rate max. So little bit of a different. I need to put spaces there. So a little bit of a different formula. Pretty effective though. I like the regression formula a lot. If I'm not going to take time to do the really good one that we're going to look at next. So let's look at like a client who is. We'll do a client who is 20 years old, right? So 20 years old, you know, they're in pretty good athletic shape. So if we did 208 minus, and then, can I put parentheses? No. Yes, I can. So 208 minus their age, which is 20, times 0.7, right? So 208 minus 20 times 0.7. That's going to give us a heart rate max of 194. If we did the classic version, it would just be 220 minus 20, which would give us a max heart rate of 200. So, you know, gives us a little bit of a different number there. Next one we've got, once we've found that, when we're doing our target heart rate, step 2 is going to be to multiply it by our desired intensity, right? So the next step for using these formulas would be to multiply heart rate max by the desired intensity, right? So for example, let's say you want your client to be in like zone 1. So for example, the goal is to have a client work at 76 65 to 75% heart rate max, right, which is zone 1. What you would do is you would say, and we would calculate our client statistics, right? So our client is 33 years old. Okay. So for the max, we would take 220 minus 33 equals calculator, because I don't want to do it in my head. 187. Okay. And then we would take 187 times 0.65. So 187 times that's going to give us 121.55. So that's going to be that. And then we'll take 187 times 0.75. That's going to be 140.25. So client's target heart rate is 122 to 140 beats per minute. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? That's how we calculate target heart rate. Pretty clear? Cool. It is a lot easier on a real whiteboard, by the way, and I totally forgot we're getting into math today. I normally do a disclaimer where I'm like, hey guys, real quick, apology, I have to do math and that's hard to watch. It's a lot easier on an actual whiteboard. So that's our general heart rate max target heart rate formula, right? It's not bad. You know, it's pretty good. You know, we got some information here. We want our client to work at zone 1. We know they're 33 years old. So we just took all of this stuff. I'm actually going to indent that one more time. Took all of this stuff and calculated it out. And there is our client's target heart rate. So now let's look at a different formula here. The next one we've got is your heart rate reserve method, or the Karvinen formula, right, is what this is called. So the next method is going to be the Karvinen, or heart rate reserve formula. Heart rate reserver. Excuse me, I'd like to reserve a heart rate. Right, so Karvinen formula. This is going to calculate target heart rate based on the difference between heart rate max and heart rate rest. Okay, so heart rate and oxygen uptake are related, right? And we know that, and so we want to work at a very specific percentage of that. And so the universally accepted method for calculating that based on something that is specific to that person is knowing what their resting heart rate is. So if you know what their resting heart rate is and you know that it's relatively low, that is going to sort of narrow the fields here, right? So if you've got time to do it, I definitely recommend doing your Karvinen formula. You know, nowadays we live in the world. I'm about to sound like an actual old fogey, but like it's crazy that we live in a world with like smartphones now, because like, you know, I used to have to actually do all this stuff in front of my client real quick. I'd be like, hold on a second, I have a calculator, do, and I would like take the resting heart rate and do this. Now you can just get online and go to an app and be like, Karvinen, boop, boop, done, you know, and it'll tell you your zones. And so like, that's a really convenient thing. If you've got time to do it, do the Karvinen method. Trust me, it's a much, much more accurate depiction of how hard somebody should be working. So this is our heart rate reserve method. It will narrow the zones, right? Because like a heart rate of 122 to 140, that's a pretty relatively large range. So we want to narrow that range to make it a little bit smaller. We can do that by calculating our client's resting heart rate. So for example, right, same goal, like nothing's different here. The goal is to have a client work out at 65 to 75% heart rate max. Again, that's going to be zone 1, right? Now we know client is 33 years old. Client's resting heart rate is 75 beats per minute. So for the math part, we are going to go 220 minus 33 is still going to equal 187, right? Nothing's really changed there. But, oh, I forgot to put the freaking formula down. Hold on a second. I forgot to write the formula. Under your carbonated method right here. So our formula is going to be, how do I do brackets? Brackets. Heart rate, oops, wrong one. Heart rate max minus heart rate rest times desired intensity. Close the bracket. Plus heart rate rest equals target heart rate. Okay, so again, if you look at it, it's your max heart rate minus your resting heart rate times your intensity, right? So it's very similar, right? Before we just went heart rate max times intensity, but we took the heart rate rest out of that part of the equation. Then all we do is we just slap it back on at the end, right? So I took, 75 beats away from that max heart rate before calculating the intensity, which gives me a really low number. So I got to add that resting heart rate back on at the end. So let's go back to our client here, right? So until now, everything's the same, right? 187, 187. But now I have to subtract I have to subtract that that resting heart rate. So 220 minus 30 equals 187. That's their heart rate max. 187 minus 75 equals, nope, that's not right. 112, right? 112 times 0.65 equals 72.8, and 112 times 0.75 84. That's nice. We got a round number. And then lastly, 72.8 plus, we got to add that 75 back on, equals 147.8, and 84 plus 75 equals 159. So client's target heart rate is 148 to 159. So our range got way different. It's the same client, but by taking into account their resting heart rate, we got a much, much, much different result, right? 148 to 159. So last little thing I want to do is just, I'm going to write that whole, I'm going to plug it in kind of like this, so that it makes even more sense. So that would be 27 minus 75 0.65 plus 75. Bracket, parentheses, parentheses. Copy to make my life easier. But change that to a 7 and change that to 150. Okay, so there we go. Those are kind of the two different ways to do it. If you want to do it step by step, you can do this version. If you want to do just the whole formula because you've got a calculator that can do it, you can do this version. Either way, it's going to tell you this range right here. All right, so that was riveting. Do you guys have any questions about that? Was any of that, obviously I know doing math on Microsoft Word, not that easy to understand, but does anybody have any questions about the carbonate method, how to do it? Pretty confident?
Yes, sir.
By the way, if you do want to do this quickly, this is like just a little pro tip here. You literally can just go to Google and just go Carbonen calculator. Click the very first link, client's age, 33, and a resting heart rate, 75 beats per minute. Calculate and check it out. There's our numbers, 148 to 159. We did it in the click of a button in one Google search. So that is actually how I recommend doing it. It'll make your life a lot easier. All right, so our last in the category of physiologic assessments that we've got is also going to be blood pressure. Right, so this is going to be used to calculate a client's, calculate the amount of pressure inside of the blood vessels of, not my best definition, but that's blood pressure, right? You're gonna have two main numbers here. You are going to have your systolic number and your diastolic number, right? Systolic blood pressure is the pressure exerted on the walls of the atria during a heart's contraction, right? So it's the amount of pressure pushing out on the walls when your heart contracts, right? Normal systolic blood pressure is going to be 120. Well, actually, it's going to be less than 120 milliliters of mercury in terms of pressure, right? So when you are using the blood pressure cuff, you want that number to basically be 120. Your diastolic pressure is the pressure exerted on the walls of the atria. I'm sorry, not atria, arteries. What am I talking about? Arteries during a heart's relaxation. So when your heart relaxes, this is the amount of pressure like sucking in basically. And so normal diastolic pressure is going to be less than 80 millimeters of mercury on that cuff, right? So that's your normal blood pressure. You just need to know it's 120 over 80. That's basically what they're looking for there. For the record, NASM like has it broken down how to do a blood pressure assessment, but they won't test you on it. Like it's in your textbook, but it's not part of the exam. So you're not going to see any questions. You will know, you need to know what like normal blood pressure is, but like it's kind of cool. They're just giving you a little bit of extra here. There's like instructions on how to do it. But because that's like a very technical, like hands-on thing, they don't really test you on it, you know? So basically you're gonna have your client sit in a comfortable position, present you with their elbow, place that cuff just above the elbow. And then you're also gonna use a stethoscope over their brachial artery. And what you do is you're going to squeeze that blood pressure cuff. you're gonna inflate it just above where you stop hearing it, right? So you're gonna be having that stethoscope on their brachial artery. You won't be able to hear their heart rate until you start pumping. All of a sudden, you'll start hearing their heart rate. Then, when their heart rate disappears again, you're gonna go 20 to 30 millimeters of pressure just above that. And then slow, and that just 20 to 30, the reason you do that is just so that it gives you time to kind of, react and let the pressure out. So then once you stop hearing it, you're 20 to 30 above, you're gonna release it just at a slow rate of about like 2 millimeters of pressure per second. And what you do is you listen, and as soon as you can hear their heart rate again, that's the top number. So, let's say you inflated it to 140, and then you slowly let the pressure out. And as the pressure gets to 120, you can start to hear the heart rhythm again. That is their systolic blood pressure. Then you're going to continue hearing their heart rate, and then it'll disappear again. As soon as you can't hear their heart rate anymore, that's their diastolic pressure. So that's how they do that, right? That's what we're testing for when we do blood pressure. You pump it up slowly until you can hear the heart rate, keep pumping until you can't hear the heart rate, then you let the pressure off. As soon as you can hear the heart rate again, you're going to write down that number. As soon as the heart rate disappears again, you're going to write down that number. Top number is when you heard the heart rate. Bottom number is when the heart rate disappeared. And that's about all we're going to do on blood pressure stuff. We are moving on straight from there. Do you guys have any questions from that?
I was always wondering what they were doing when I went to the hospital. When the doctors, like, how they were doing it. That's cool.
Totally.
That's how they do it. That's cool.
Let me tell you, man. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, doctors, they're testing that stuff like 100,000 times a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, from the few times that I've done like blood pressure testing, and like my clients over there, like talking to me, like, yeah, so anyway, like we're going to Whole Foods later today, and I'm hoping to get some like good stuff, because I'm working on this diet that you and I are working on, and I'm like, right. I can't, I need you to hush.
Right.
Like I'm not good at this. Like I'm not like a pro.
Right. I'm not that guy. I'm not right. That's so funny.
I remember like as a kid, like every check-in of it, and I still do this, and like I just said that, so like I should have awareness, but like every time I go into the doctor, I'm always a little nervous, and when I get nervous, I talk more, and so I'm always just like, yeah, well, hopefully I don't have to get any shots today. I don't know if you can look in the system, don't you? And I'm like, da 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 da. And my doctors are telling me to shut up. Like they're always really professional, and just like deal with it. I'm like. And then I never ever have like the mental awareness in the moment, but then I like walk away and I go, that guy just listened to me drone on about nothing. And what a great doctor. I'm always like impressed afterwards.
Yeah.
God.
That's cool. That's cool.
I must be like the worst. The last time I went in, literally the guy, the first time I've like had somebody, and I don't know if they were like a newer nurse or what, but they were taking my blood samples, and he was like, hey man, I need you to hush so that I don't miss. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And I said all the time, like to my clients, so I was like, great. And like, I didn't, you could tell he was like kind of hesitant to tell me to shut up.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
and I nearly passed out because I hate needles. I'm a real baby when it comes to needles. Like, blood does not bother me. Like I could see, a pool of blood and be like, but like a needle, oh man, every time it happens, like the last time I got it, I instantly, like I looked over at my palm because I always stare too. Like people say you're supposed to look away, but like I feel more comfortable when I'm like, I just stare at the needle as it's going in. Like I need to know when the pain's gonna, I need to see it.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I'm looking at my arm, right? It's like out like this, and he's injecting me, like he's taking blood from like right here. And I'm looking at my palm, and I look over, and my palm it looked like I dunked it into water. Like I instantly got like flop sweat. Like I was just, and I don't get like sweaty palm like ever. And it was literally like, I mean, it was a pool of water in my hand. like I was like, oh man. And he was like, oh, and like he noticed it too, and he was like, oh buddy. He grabs like a towel and wipes my eyes. He's like, you gonna be okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. And then I was like slowly leaving. He's like, stay with me. Oh man, it was so bad.
Oh man.
Oh, ugh. Okay, and we're back. I'm actually due. Actually, what is it? We're in May. Yeah, it's past May 15th. That means I am eligible to donate blood again. I gotta go get it done. Ugh. Especially in this time, people could use it. Fun. All right. I have a couple days to psych myself up for that. Let's look at body composition. All right. So body composition assessments. This is our next big category here. Where am I at? Not quite. Okay. So body composition assessments. So a brief rundown on how to do this, right? So there's obviously a lot of different ways to calculate like body composition, right? There's a bunch of different methods out there. There are skin fold measurements, bioelectric impedance, and hydrostatic weighing. There's also things like, there's this word that I totally cannot say. Body fat air displacement. Oh, come on, what's it called? Plethysmography. I can't ever say that word. Plethysmography. Air displacement, which is basically, if you've ever seen like the body egg, you know, it kind of looks like that thing Dr. Evil gets into in the Austin Powers movies. But basically, you get in here and it measures like how air is displaced, and that's used to measure your body fat percentage. So that's not a bad method. DEXA scans, that's another really good one. So there's a lot of different like body composition methods out there. Primarily the ones we are going to focus on are going to be bioelectric impedance and skin fold measurements. Those are the two that you are going to have the most readily available access to. However, obviously you can always do like hydrostatic weighing if you send your client to like a place that they have it. But body composition assessments, first one, let's look at percent body fat, right? So this is going to calculate an individual's mass of body fat versus their overall body mass. So the way you get your body fat percentage is like, let's say you have 10 pounds of fat on your body. Actually, that's pretty low. Let's say you have 20 pounds of fat on your body and you weigh 190 pounds, right? So what you would do is you would take 20 and divide that by 190, and that would give you 10.5% body fat, right? So that's how you calculate it. It's the number of, it's the poundage of fat that you have divided by your overall body weight. That's how we calculate that. So how the heck do you determine like how much, you know, you can't like suck somebody's fat out, slap it onto a scale and measure it and then put it back in the body, right? Like how do we measure their body fat percentage? Well, we have a pretty good formula here when it comes to like measuring like the amount of subcutaneous fat. So I'm gonna go ahead and lose the sweatshirt here. It's warmed up a bit anyways. So if we look at like, you know, the amount of fat that's trapped underneath your skin, like if you pinch on your biceps, you can see like that's not just skin, right? There's other tissue there as well, right? The same thing is true of the triceps. So that's your subcutaneous fat. We have, you know, measurements that we can do. We can pinch that and measure like your skin fold thickness. That'll give us a good estimate for somebody's body fat percentage. So first one we're going to look at of the three is going to be the skin fold caliper method, right? So skin fold measurements. So what a skin fold measurement is, it's going to measure or estimate body fat percent by measuring the amount, measuring the girth of subcutaneous fat, okay? So basically, you're looking at like the amount of fat under their skin, right? So Assement is going to recommend using like the Dernan-Wamersley formula, which is like just the greatest name of all time. The Dernan-Wamersley formula is a 4-site method for measuring skin fold thickness, right? So what you're going to do is you are going to how do I want to structure this? Use a skin fold caliper to measure. There we go. You're going to use the skin fold caliper to measure their biceps, triceps, subscapular, and iliac crest. Okay. So those are the methods. Your bicep, you're going to do a vertical fold halfway between the shoulder and elbow. So we're giving you a lot of details here. I don't think they will actually ask you what the site methods are. We might in your homeworks. You might have questions in your homeworks that are related to like, hey, where do you place the skin fold caliper? I don't think you're going to see that on your regular NASM exam. However, they may ask you like, you know, what is NASM's preferred method, or what is a four-site method for calculating body fat percentage? You do need to know that's like the Dernan-Wamersley formula, right? So be able to spot things like that. Or they might ask you like, the Dernan-Wamersley formula calculates body fat percentage by measuring blank, and that's going to be like subcutaneous fat girth, right? The width of the fat in underneath your skin. So we're going to get some details in here that are a little overly detailed, but it's all to kind of help you, you know, make this even clearer. So your biceps, vertical fold halfway between the shoulder and elbow. Then your triceps, same concept, literally exactly the same actually. So your triceps, vertical fold halfway between the shoulder and elbow. So nothing fancy there. Your subscapular is going to be a 45-degree angle. That is a 45-degree angle 1 to 2 centimeters below the inferior angle of the scapula. So when they say inferior angle of the scapula, that's the point of your scapula. Remember, your scapula is kind of shaped kind of like this, right? It kind of points like that. So just below where that point comes together, you're going to do 1 to 2 centimeters. What I like to do is actually run my index finger along somebody's scapula until I find the inferior angle. Then I just like to slide my finger, you know, because my finger's about 1 centimeter's width. I like to slide that just off the scapula and then pinch with my thumb. So I just kind of like slide that off, bring that around, and then that gives me like a good pinch to hold on to. And then lastly, you're going to do your iliac crest. And this is exactly the same concept. Iliac crest. And that's going to be a 45-degree angle just above the iliac crest. Okay, so iliac spine, right? That ASIS. So that crest is right here. So what you're going to do is you're just going to go a couple inches above, or a couple centimeters above that, and get like a good pinch there. And that is going to give you that measurement. That can sometimes get a little uncomfortable, especially if it's like a first-time client. So what you can always do is you can instruct them to go, okay, I want you to take your hand and grab that, and then I'm just going to come along with the body fat tester, and you can just kind of hold it there, and that way you don't have to have any contact that might make somebody feel awkward or uncomfortable. So then what you're going to do is you're going to add all of the numbers gathered up into one lump sum and compare it to the charts in your book that correspond with your client's age. So let's see if I can find a Google picture of this. Dernan-Wamersley chart. There we go. All right, so let's say like your client is 35 years old, right? So we put them in here, and you summed all their measurements up, and they had a sum of 25, right? So what you would do is you would stay on this line here, and you would go to 20. It's halfway between 24.5 and 25.5. So that would put them in the above average category, right? That would. Oh, that's fine. This is only doing the categories. I want to see the body fat percentages. Give me the numbers. There we go. Oh, my ears just popped. That's for kids. Don't want the one for kids. I want for adults. Come on, come on, come on. Good Lord. All right, well. Hey, there we go. Okay. So again, they're 35, right? The sum of their folds was 25, so that chart's up here now. And so we go down to here. That means they have 32.1% body fat. Okay. So that's going to be how we use that chart. That chart's in your book, by the way. So you will be able to find that, although it won't be color coordinated like that. It'll just be, tell you your body fat percentages. Cool. So that is that one. Now, I've got to address the other two methods just really quick by definition. So that is your skin fold measurement. The next one you're going to see is also bioelectric impedance. And that is going to measure body fat by sending an insensible electric current through the body to measure how impeded the electric current is, right? So the idea behind that, just to make sure that like makes sense to everybody, we know that electricity travels through water really, really, really quickly, but it travels through oil or lipids very, very slowly, right? So if you have, if you tell the body fat tester how many pounds you are, it will make an assumption on how fast that signal should be able to travel. If that signal travels really slow, it means there's more body fat in that number of pounds. And if it travels really quickly, it knows that there's less body fat in that number of pounds because most of the tissue is made up of water. Used to be pretty inaccurate for the most part, but bioelectric impedance testing has gotten a lot better in the last few years. And now there's like, I don't dislike those body fat scales that you can get at home. But generally, if you can get one with like more sites of contact where like you have your arms and your legs simultaneously, that's going to be a much more, accurate reading. So electricity run through water very quickly and lipids very slowly. If an individual has a higher percentage body fat, the electric current was impeded and traveled slowly. Cool. And then hydrostatic weighing. We'll measure body fat percentage by calculating the body's, let's see if I can spell the word buoyancy. Not even close. Buoyancy. Buoyancy, that's right. I knew that. So that's how you're going to measure. You're basically looking for how buoyant your client is, right? We know how much 180 pounds is supposed to weigh underwater. If it weighs a lot less while it's underwater, we know that like there's more lipids because lipids don't have as much density as water does. So the body will weigh less underwater. There's a really great, my teacher actually had this on his board, but there's a really great Garfield comic that actually highlights this pretty well. Garfield that floats. Let's see if I can find this. Nah, it's just a bunch of picture of Garfield floats. There it is. Yeah, my teacher had this on his wall, and he would explain it whenever he would always use this as an example. Yeah, that does float. That's actually scientifically accurate. It's why oils sit on the top of your water if you've ever put it in like with a pot of pasta. So kind of silly, but kind of fun. Okay. Next part of body composition testing that we've got are going to be circumference measurements. So circumference measurements, right? These are going to measure body girth in order to determine body composition, right? This is a great source of feedback for clients who have the goal of altering body composition. If you got a client who's trying to lose weight or gain muscle, circumference measurements are one of your best tools. They're really cool because like they are something that fluctuates pretty frequently. And so you can see those fluctuations continually like going in a downward trend. Always try to make sure that like the big thing here is that consistency is key. Consistency is a key factor. Always measure on the same side of the body. You can do like left and right arms, left and right calves if you want to. Generally, you'll end up doing one or the other if you're just trying to move through that quickly. But make sure you're always being as consistent as possible. Circumference measurements are really prone to errors. It's really easy to goof up circumference measurements. Like if you pull too hard on the tape measure one time and then you don't pull hard enough the next time, it's going to make your client look like they gained a couple inches, right? And we don't really want their client to experience that. So the preferred method is using like a body fat, I'm sorry, not a body fat, but a circumference tool that has like tension on it. What am I trying to say here? Body tape measure. If you can, what I recommend is getting one of these. They're relatively cheap. I know that does not look cheap, but that's for 200 of them. And what you do is you basically put this little plastic bit in here, you put it around your client's body, and then you're gonna hit this button and it'll auto retract the tape measure. And that way it pulls the same amount every time rather than, you know, allowing for like human error. That's not bad. That's a really cheap one. And so like, that's a good place for you to start. If you get really serious about doing body fat, body measurements, then I recommend, these are always hard to find. I never know how to like Google it. Accuracy. And where is it? There we go. This one right here. A Gulick, that's what they're called. Gulick tape measure. So these are going to be your best. And what a Gulick tape measure does, if you look at this tape measure here, there we go, that's a really great picture. See how it has this little spring inside of it and it's tied to kind of like this fishing wire here? See how this person's like pulling on the end? And what that's doing is that's stretching the spring out further and further and further. See this little red ball here? You can't really see it in the picture, but there's actually 2 red balls. There's another one tied to that right here on the other side. And what you do is you line up with this sleeve right in between the 2. And what that does is that ensures that you pulled for the exact same amount of tension every single time, right? You line the ball up in the same spot every time. If you pull and like both balls are in the tube, then you pulled too hard. If you can't see the red ball, then you didn't pull hard enough. So you line them up like dead center in each other. And that's really cool. Like if you're working in a place, like I used to work when I worked at like Wealth at the resort, we would take people's measurements the day they came in, but like, you know, those weekend shifts were not exactly everybody's favorite shift. So like, you know, our boss tried to do, like when it was Biggest Loser, tried to like put us on different days. That way you didn't end up having to work every Sunday for the rest of your life, you know? And so like, you know, you would get one every couple of weeks that would show up, which meant that somebody measuring somebody as they came in could be different than somebody who measured them on the way out. And that could throw off their measurements. So by using that, that made sure that like, you know, if I pulled somebody super hard, well, actually, they make sure that I can't pull somebody super hard, right? That makes sure that like, you know, if Erica and I were both like training the same person, we would both pull for the same amount of tension. So those are really a big key. That's a key factor, consistency. Also, encourage clients to wear the same clothing on measurement days. So that's another thing you want to do. Make sure your client's wearing the same clothes that they tested in with. This is particularly important with like your female clients. Let me tell you, man, sports bra, I mean, I'm no sports bra expert, but I will tell you that like a change from one to another will make a massive difference in someone's measurements, you know? I've had clients, we've had guests, like, actually we used to have this all the time. Like this happened like once a week. We'd have a guest like, you know, not heed our warnings and be like, make sure you wear the same clothes. And somebody wouldn't listen. And they'd come in and be like, you gained 4 inches on your chest. That's pretty impressive for 1 week's time, you know? Like, it can make a huge, 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 huge difference. So, you know, just be aware of that when you're taking your measurements. So your circumference measurements that you're gonna take are going to be the neck along the Adam's apple. Okay. Is that capitalized? I guess so. Your chest measurement. You are going to take this along the nipple line if you don't have any clear markers. If it's a female client, generally what you do is it's at the first, like where their chest begins flattening. If there's no apparent flattening, then you do the nipple line. So along the first apparent flattening of the chest, if no flattening is apparent, along the nipple line. Okay. Then we have got your waist measurement. Now this is arguably, we get these next two are the most important measurements you're going to take. You got the waist. You're going to take that at the narrowest part of the waist, below the rib cage, above the hip bones, so above the ASIS, okay? So you're gonna look for the narrowest part of their waist above their hip bones, okay? And then again, similarly, if no apparent narrowing exists, along the belly button. So me personally, I like using the belly button. Well, hold on, I'll hold off on that. Next one. You've got your hips. And that is going to be at the widest portion of the hips. So, oh, and actually this is important, with feet together. Okay, so what you're gonna do actually, rather than looking like at the sides, generally you're gonna look from the side to see like where the butt's sticking out the most. That's gonna give you the widest part of their hips in general. But you want the widest measurement you can get at the hips there. But make sure you always tell your client to stand feet together. There's nothing fancy about that. It doesn't make their hips flare or anything. It's just that, you know, when you have them stand together, that ensures that like they're not standing in this posture when you take their measurements the first time, and then standing in like this posture the second time, and then this posture the third time. You're just being consistent, right? It again adds to that consistency. So that's an important measurement there. Then we got your circumference measurements at the thigh, which is going to be, what have I done? Close that. Which is going to be 10 inches above the patella. I will say this about 10 inches above the patella. That is the official place that NASM is recommending. However, if your client is 5'5", you know, maybe they are a very efficient use of space and not the tallest person in the world. If that person's built a little closer to the ground, you do 10 inches above their patella, you are going to be right up in the groin. That again can sometimes get a little uncomfortable for your clients. So if you want, you can change that to any number. Just make sure you're being consistent. If you change it to 5 inches above the patella, make sure you write down that you're like, I did it 5 inches above the patella. Any adjustments you make sure that you write them down so that you're aware of it. Calf is at the widest part of the calf. I actually hate that version. Personally, again, I think that can be somewhat inconsistent. I like to go halfway between the calf, but that's just me. Maximal circumference of the calf. Okay, now that leads me to our waist to hip ratio, which is always a frickin' cause for concern whenever I get to this slide because NASM's changed these numbers a few times. So our waist to hip ratio. When you are doing your circumference measurements and you do the widest, the narrowest versus the widest, that's going to give you a ratio. Now we know that there is a lot more risk for certain chronic illnesses and a lot more risk for certain diseases when your clients hold a lot of particularly like abdominal fat. Abdominal fat has been associated with diabetes, hypertension, coronary heart disease. It's associated with way more problems than just a high body fat percentage. So this is why the waist to hip ratio is one of those things we do want to measure. Now, kind of going back, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of advice that's not in your textbook. When it comes to measurements, honestly, the two that are most important to your clients are the waist and the hips, and then probably the chest. Like most people are caring about like their torso. If you can get a good idea of like what the torso is looking like, you get a pretty good idea of like how their measurements are changing. Generally, those are, at this point in my career, really the only 3 measurements that I actually take the time to do, unless my client really asks for it. If my client is like actually calculating their body fat percentage and they really, like, you know, they're really caring about like carving out specific parts of their body, they want to know how their arms are doing, I'll absolutely do their circumference measurements. But generally, I go chest, waist, hips. And most of the time, your clients aren't comparing their measurements to like, you know, their tailor. They're not using you to figure out how many inches their waist is. They're trying to see the changes in their body composition. That's all they care about. They don't actually even care about they don't know what the standard numbers are. They just want to see the numbers change. So when it comes down to like doing like measurements, generally I like to use body landmarks as a way of getting through that much faster. I will go nipple line for literally all my clients because that's much easier to just go. I'll be go, all right, place this in the dead center of your chest, and I'll have my client place that. I'll go around the back and get that measurement, right? That way I don't have to do any like hands-on work. I can have them place it, and they always place it in the same spot, right? This is something that's not really moving around all that much on our clients unless there are severe body composition changes. Then I like to go straight to the belly button for everybody. I don't do the narrowest part of the waist when I am measuring my clients. Your belly button's not going to move. That is a physical landmark. Super easy for your client to take a tape measure, whoop, put it on their belly button, right? And then last one that seems complicated, but rather than doing the widest part of their hips, I don't like to do widest part of the hips because that can be kind of subjective. I might think that it's wide up here at one point, 1 week, and the next week, maybe I change my opinion. So instead, what I like to do is I like to have my clients take their hands like this, place their thumbs together. They don't do this, they don't do that, they don't let their fingers spread. They have all their fingers held together like so, and they make a perfect 90-degree box. Then they place their thumbs onto their belly button and fold that down. and open straight out up to the hips. Then whatever their longest finger is, that's where I place the tape measure. And I go around to both sides underneath their longest finger. Some people it's their middle finger, some people it's their ring finger, whatever. Longest finger. And when I do that, you know, I know that their belly button's not going to move. I know that their chest is not going to move, right? And I know that their fingers, as long as they don't lose one from one week to another, are going to be the same length. So that ensures super accurate like versions every single week. Is that the real waist measurement? No. Is it the real hip measurement? No. But it is showing my client consistency in terms of like them losing inches. And if that's all they care about is like, you know, seeing their progress, that's a great way to measure progress. That's my favorite method, not in your book. Now, that being said, if you do that method, this formula won't work, right? Because you're not measuring at the narrowest and the widest. You're just measuring into body landmarks. So that's sort of a little bit of a difference there. Now let's look at that waist to hip ratio. So your waist to hip ratio is the ratio of body girth comparing the narrowest part of the waist versus the widest part of the hips, right? Oops. We know there is a correlation between chronic disease and excessive abdominal fat. So because there is like abdominal fat in particular has been shown to be so dangerous, again, these are the measurements you want to like get your clients to focus on, their waist to hip ratio. So I'll even like have those numbers separate from like my other waist ratios, because like that's something I can check in with once a week. My waist to hip ratio, maybe I only do that every couple of months, right? What we are looking for, again, it is the widest part of the, narrowest part of the hips divided by the widest part. I did it again. I said hips. Narrowest part of the waist divided by the widest part of the hips. That's your waist to hip ratio. What we are looking for is ideal ranges is going to be, so we know that a ratio of 0.8 for females or a 0.95 for males may put them at risk, right? If their ratio is higher than that, so we're looking for numbers that are lower than that, right? So we're looking for less than 0.8 for females, good Lord, and less than 0.95 for males. You know what, let's put these on a different line actually. There we go. So those are our ideal ranges. Those are numbers you're going to want to know, which sucks because they keep changing them. But they are numbers that might show up on a test. Cool. Last little bit of body composition stuff. Our final little bit here is going to be BMI, which I know we've talked plenty about, so we'll get through this one real quick. So body mass index, or BMI, right? That is going to be a calculation of a client's height versus their weight to estimate body composition, right? So you're basically just measuring somebody's height versus their weight. It's as simple as that. You do want to use kilograms and meters squared in the original formula. This is the formula you want to know. you do actually want, they love to ask this question. So, so body formula is BMI equals their weight in kilograms divided, hold on a second, I apologize. Alt 0247. Weight in kilograms divided by their height in meters squared. Super accurate notes. Okay. So weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. I'm going to put silly American formula. If you want to know it, it is going to be BMI equals your weight in pounds divided by your height in inches squared times 702. So that's another way that you can calculate that. If you do want to do the American version, it's your weight in pounds divided by your height in inches squared times 702, which seems like a really weird number. Trust me, it'll come out normal. But do not memorize this formula, please. Memorize this formula. This actually may be a test question. So weight in kilograms, height in meters squared. And then we have our normal ranges, right? So BMI, if a BMI exceeding 25 is considered overweight, BMI exceeding 30 is considered obese. Okay, so those are our numbers. Okay, so that is a really simple breakdown of the body composition stuff. Really some hard objective data, right? Now let's get into a little bit of like the performance style stuff with our cardiorespiratory assessments. Let's measure like how somebody's actually functioning rather than just maybe how they look. Where did I put it? I'm trying to find it. Come on, quick. Okay, hollow. Okay, so cardiorespiratory assessments. Two key ones here. Now, for the record, there are more. I'm going to show you a quick little video, actually. We've already talked about the Rockport walk test in our seniors class, so I know you guys are pretty familiar with that. So we'll just slap that into your notes. We've talked a little bit about the YMCA 3-minute step test as well. But one that we didn't go over is the Wingate test, and this is kind of a fun fitness assessment. So here's a quick little video.
All right, so today we have Mark Hannigan here. He's going to be the test subject on what's called the Wingate test. The Wingate test is an approximation of your anaerobic threshold. It's done on a cycle ergometer, as you can see. The test entails a warm-up procedure, which he's doing right now, followed by 30 seconds of completely all-out sprinting. During that time, the weight on the front of this is dropped and applied to the flywheel right here. That weight corresponds to 7.5% of his body weight. At that time, he sprints as hard as he can for 30 seconds, and we calculate power output over the entire course of the 30 seconds, as well as every 5 seconds. Power output is calculated by the angular velocity of the pedals, as well as the torque that's applied to the flywheel. Ready, set, go. Good job, good job. Keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. All right, that's 8, 9, 10 seconds, 20 more seconds, as fast as you can go, as fast as you can go. All right, you're halfway there, keep pushing, 12 more seconds, 10 more seconds, keep pushing. The last 10 seconds, last 7 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop. So now he should be spinning easy with the weight up so that we make sure he gets a proper cool down and blood continues to proliferate through his legs. If he didn't cool down, then we could have blood pooling in the lower legs and you could have a subject pass out. In this table, we can see his peak power, which represents his peak absolute power, as well as anaerobic capacity over the entire test and average power. Next, we have a graph of his power over the time of the entire test. As you can see, the power declines pretty steadily after it peaks in the first 5 seconds. In review, we're calculating power in this test. Power is calculated as work over time or force times distance over time. The results from the test show the maximal power, which is related to his maximal anaerobic potential, his average power, which is his work done over the entire test, and the decline, which is his anaerobic fatigue. We primarily use 2 energy systems during this test. The first is the ATP creatine phosphate system for the first 5 to 10 seconds of the test. Following that is anaerobic glycolysis, used for the remainder of the test. In anaerobia, there's a rapid decrease in muscle pH, which is known to be a cause of fatigue.
So, there's all my comic book stuff. I'll go ahead and minimize that. So you can see, like, we're looking at our assessments, right? Like the Wingate test is really cool because it can show like how much anaerobic power potential you have. Remember how earlier we talked about how power is a formula of force times velocity? Well, if you're doing it on like a bike, right, they're using like distance times like velocity, right? So like how quickly they traveled, you know, that's similar to like your force, like how far you're pushing something. So what happens is the second they drop, like you get them up to speed. So that way they don't have to like work against the spin bike, like speeding up, right? So you get them up to speed and they're going, and they're not like working super hard here. They're, you know, they're really hardly working at all. You know, they should be able to maintain that distance for like a super, super long period of time. So there's nothing intense. And then what happens is it drops. He said 7.5% of the body weight. I thought that it was 10% of the body weight. That I'm trying to find evidence of that. I found a couple, but I'm thinking maybe the original version of the test was actually 7.5%. Anyway, whatever you have entered into the computer, I guess, is how much weight you can drop on their weight on the bike. But what happens is like it drops that much weight on the bike. So now there's more force against the bike, and you're going to continue trying to pump up your velocity. So you're trying to generate as much power. And so what you'll see is when you're using that creatine phosphate system, right? When you're using your phosphagen system, for that first 5 to 10 seconds, the power output's going to be super high. It goes and it spikes up like crazy. But then as you kick out of that energy system into glycolysis, that energy is going to go down and your power output decreases slowly over time. Now, the test is only measuring like your anaerobic power, right? It's only measuring glycolysis and the phosphagen system. But if you were to like keep going for as long as you can and just try to like maintain it until like maybe say you try to keep it up for like a full 2 minutes, first off, that's going to be really bad and you're going to throw up almost for sure. But if you were to do that, you would notice power would slowly decline as you kick out of glycolysis into your aerobic metabolism, right? Your aerobic metabolism is great for going for long distances, but it's not used for like explosive power. So there's like a little precursor to some of our physiology lessons that are coming up in the future as we get into energy systems. But that's your Wingate test. It's a really, really great cardiorespiratory assessment. For the most part, when it comes to just our NASM assessments, the 2 that you're going to look at that are most common are the Rockport walk test and the YMCA 3-minute step test. So cardiorespiratory assessments are going to provide information about overall cardiorespiratory efficiency and condition, right? So you're just measuring how well somebody is performing their cardio. why we want to do this is it is going to provide a starting point for cardiorespiratory training zones specific to the client. You know, let's say you're training like an athlete and you need to choose whether to put them into zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3. You need to figure out like what they're actually like eligible for. You need to figure out like how good their cardio is. If they're not so great at cardio and you try to put them into zone 3, you know, they're likely not going to be able to work hard enough. They'll get into zone 3, but they might, you know, damage their body actually by working too hard. And that's definitely something we want to avoid. So we need to establish like a good foundation first. If your client comes in and they're a cardio rock star, they already have like a really solid foundation, you can go a little more intense on your cardiovascular workouts. So the first one we're going to look at is the YMCA 3-minute step test. Right, and that's going to determine a client's cardiorespiratory training zones based on a bout of submaximal stair climbing, right? So you're gonna do, you're gonna put them on like a series of steps over the course of like 3 minutes, okay? So again, your heart rate zones here are no different, right? 65, 75, 76, 85, that's all the same. But when you get on the step test, the way that you're gonna do it, your protocols are going to be perform a 3-minute step test by doing 24 steps per minute, right? That's, by the way, that's 96 touches. On a 12-inch step for 3 minutes, okay? So you are going to do that on like a 12-inch step for 3 minutes straight at 96 beats per minute. So like if they're stepping up, left, right, that's technically 1 step, but it was 4 touches. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're going to have them do 96, right? So you set a metronome to 96 steps per minute and ask them to step at that rate. So, you know, if you go to Google, you can actually just type in metronome. It actually has one built into Google. Just turn to 96. Now, this is not 12 inches, but. And we're going to do this for 3 minutes, okay? And you're going to try and keep it on pace. And I will turn that off because surely people are going crazy by now. So that is your 3-minute step test. Then next thing you want to do is you want to have the client turn and sit on the step or in a chair and present their left arm, okay? Next step, record their recovery pulse. I'm actually going to bold that. So you're recovering their pulse over the next 60 seconds. It's really important that you do the full 60 seconds. Do not use a modified formula to determine the 60-second pulse. Okay, don't use a modified formula. Do not do 15 seconds multiplied by 4. Don't do 6 seconds multiplied by 10. You are measuring how long it takes their pulse to return to normal over 60 seconds, okay? And then finally, you're going to locate the score in your textbook. So once you have sort of gotten it and their pulse is kind of slowly, you know, falling back down, you're going to look at like what those scores are. So let's take a look here. So let's say your client, you know, your client is 35 years old, she's female, and you recorded her pulse and her pulse was 98 beats per minute. you know, or her recovery pulse was 98. It's not 98 beats per minute, but it's 98 over the course of the minute as she was like sitting and slowly recovering. Like maybe it was, if you only did it for that 6 seconds and multiply by 10, it might be all the way up in like the 130s. But as her pulse slowly slows down, you know, that's going to give you the recovery. So if it was 96, she would be in the above average category. We go back to our PowerPoint here. Above average would probably put her into zone 2. So she would be eligible for 76 to 85% of her heart rate max at the start of your training sessions, okay? So that's a really big one. We've also got the Rockport walk test. Now, this is a totally different test used for totally different purposes. But this is used to determine, to estimate a client's VO2 max after a 1 mile bout of sub-maximal walking, right? So you're gonna have your client walk a mile as fast as they can without breaking into a jog. And you are going to measure a lot of different things, right? You know, you're going to measure their heart rate as it at the end of the test. Now, this is not a recovery pulse. This is one that, like, the minute they're done with that mile, boom, get their pulse. You want to know what it is in that moment. So you get their heart rate, how long it took them to walk, what their age is, their gender, their body weight. All of those things come together to help you determine their VO2 max. And some of those might be confusing, like, why the heck would it matter, you know, what someone weighs in terms of, you know, a cardio assessment? Why does their weight have anything to do? You could be heavy and be really great at cardio, right? Well, remember, like, we know that the more you weigh, the more oxygen you're going to consume. So, like, based on how your heart rate is corresponding with how long it took you and what your heart rate was at the end of that intensity, we know what the cardiorespiratory oxygen consumption should be. But the more you weigh, again, the more METs, right? It's 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight. So your body weight is a determining factor there. And again, heart rate zones, right? Zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. So record their rate. So our protocols, perform a 1 mile walk as fast as he or she, as fast as they can. Record the time it takes to complete the walk. Record their heart rate at the 1 mile mark. Not recovery pulse. And then use the formula in the textbook to determine VO2 max. Take a look at this. Here's your formula. It is a really, 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 really crazy formula, actually. All of these numbers here, the 132, the 0.3877, the 6.315, all of those numbers are static numbers, by the way. You're going to leave those alone. But it's 132 times this, times their weight, times that, times their age, times that, times their gender, which 0 for females, 1 for males, that, and that. Pretty crazy, right? So let's say our client is female, 35 years old. Their heart rate was 140 at the end of the assessment. They weigh 163 pounds. It took them 14 minutes and 12 seconds. If we calculate that, their VO2 is 38.48. So is that any good? Let's find out. We look over here. Here's our females, right? How old was our client? 35. So they're going to be right in here, and their VO2 was 38. So that is going to be excellent. Let's say their recovery pulse was 150. That's going to give them a 36. That's also pretty good, right? Let's say their heart rate was 160. That's going to give them a 35. still not bad, right? Put them in the good category. But let's say it took them like a little bit longer to perform. Let's say it took them 16 minutes. We had 2 minutes on there. Their VO2 is going to drop all the way down to 28. That's only going to be fair, right? So those are what we're looking at when it comes to our Rockport walk test. It just gives you an idea of where to start your client when it comes to performing their cardio. Any questions on Rockport?
No, that was good.
No. All right. Well, those are your cardio assessments. That's your composition stuff. This is the most wordy of the days we've got coming. The rest of the course is kind of easier after this in terms of like note taking. What was that? How many? This might be a record for how many pages we got. I mean, the kinesiology stuff was a lot of pages. Let's see here. 9 pages. Yeah, that was a long one. Whoop. Cancel. Wait. I got a chat bubble. What's it say? Still taking. Oh, sorry, Erica. Hopefully that's better. So that is, if you're taking them off the PowerPoint, I should bring the PowerPoint back up as well. So that is how you're going to do those assessments. Like I said, this is the most wordy compared to the days coming up. However, we will get into like an example programming over the days coming up. So we're going to look at like tomorrow, we're going to get back into posture and we're going to start breaking down like our specific sections. I'll pull up the day by day here actually. So we just covered today where we went over your pulse and your body composition stuff. We went over like our VO2 testing. Tomorrow we're getting into movements assessments. So overhead squats, single leg, and some others. This is going to break down a little bit different, just slightly different than some of these. But what we're going to do, because the overhead squat and the single leg squat and the push-pull assessments have a lot of information, or at least there's a lot of nuance to how to do them. What we'll start doing over the next bit of this class is we're going to go overhead squat tomorrow in general. Then we're going to look at one postural distortion in general tomorrow. And we'll do an example program for how to fix that postural distortion. Next day, we might dive into like performance assessments or whatever type of assessments we're getting into. But then at the end of class, the second half, we will dive right back to the overhead squat and we'll look at another postural distortion. So think of it as we are almost talking about the overhead squat for the rest of this course, but the only lesson is technically tomorrow. So it'll be like, we'll do feet turnout tomorrow, for instance. Then maybe we start talking about like upper body agility stuff, which has nothing to do with your posture. But then as the class is over on Monday, we'll get into like knees cave in. So that's how the rest of this is going to break down. Do you guys have any questions or comments or concerns about today's lesson? You guys feeling pretty good?
Yeah, that was a great question.
Hopefully you guys don't have carpal tunnel after that one. 9 pages of notes. That was a big one today. So this will be up on Canvas in a little bit, and yeah, that's about all I got for you guys.
All right, I'll see y'all tomorrow. Thank you so much. Bye,
No
guys.
problem.
Thank you.
See you later, guys.
Thank you.